In 2013, Steve Ballmer stood on stage and made a promise that would define his legacy as one of the most expensive failures in corporate history. "We're going to sell 50 million Windows phones," he declared, sweat gleaming on his forehead, fist pumping with the enthusiasm that had become his trademark. Just 2 years later, his successor Satya Nadella would stand before shareholders and admit the truth. Microsoft had burned through $7.6 billion, more money than the entire GDP of some countries, trying to compete with Apple's iPhone and Google's Android. Not only did they lose more than they paid for Nokia, but they gained essentially zero market share in return. How does a company as powerful as Microsoft, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, with some of the smartest engineers on the planet, take a mobile phone company, destroy its value completely, lay off nearly 8,000 employees, and walk away with nothing to show for it except humiliation and shareholder fury? And here's the twist that makes this story even more bizarre. Some people believe Nokia's own CEO deliberately sabotaged the company from the inside just to force this disastrous acquisition. Today, you're going to learn exactly how Steve Ballmer's mobile phone obsession cost Microsoft $7.6 billion and marked the end of his reign as CEO. If you appreciate deep dives into the economic disasters that changed the tech world, the kind of business catastrophes most people slept through while they were busy checking their iPhones, please hit that like button and subscribe to The Sleeping Economist. Ring the notification bell, because these financial mysteries only get more fascinating from here. Chapter 1. The Empire's Blind Spot. To understand how Microsoft lost $7.6 billion on Nokia, you need to understand how terrified Steve Ballmer was of irrelevance. By 2010, Microsoft dominated desktop computing. Windows ran on over 90% of the world's computers. Office software generated billions in revenue. Xbox was conquering living rooms. On paper, Microsoft was unstoppable. But Ballmer saw something that kept him awake at night. Smartphones were replacing computers as the primary way people accessed the internet. And Microsoft was getting destroyed. When Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, Ballmer literally laughed at it. $500, fully subsidized, with a plan? He scoffed in a now infamous interview. "I said that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard." That quote aged like milk left in the desert sun. By 2010, Apple's iPhone had revolutionized the smartphone market. Google's Android operating system was spreading like wildfire, powering phones from Samsung, HTC, Motorola, and dozens of other manufacturers. Microsoft's Windows Mobile, the clunky, stylus-based operating system they'd been pushing since the early 2000s, had become a punchline. Ballmer knew Microsoft needed to compete. In October 2010, they launched Windows Phone 7, a complete redesign with colorful tiles and smooth animations. It was actually pretty good. Tech reviewers praised its fresh interface. But there was one massive problem. Nobody was making Windows phones. That's where Nokia enters our story. Nokia, once the undisputed king of mobile phones, was bleeding market share. In 2007, Nokia held nearly 50% of the global mobile phone market. By 2010, that had collapsed to 29% and dropping fast. The iPhone and Android phones were eating Nokia's lunch, and the Finnish giant was in full panic mode. In February 2011, Nokia's CEO, Stephen Elop, a former Microsoft executive, sent an internal memo that would become legendary in business schools. He called Nokia a burning platform, comparing the company to a man standing on an oil rig engulfed in flames, forced to choose between burning alive or jumping into freezing water. Elop made a dramatic decision. Nokia would abandon its own operating systems and bet everything on Windows Phone. This partnership seemed perfect. Nokia needed modern software. Microsoft needed hardware partners. Together, they'd challenge Apple and Google's duopoly. But this partnership wasn't enough for Steve Ballmer. He wanted total control. He wanted Microsoft to own the entire smartphone experience, just like Apple did. He wanted Nokia itself. That desire would cost Microsoft more than the price of 10 Boeing 747 airplanes. Chapter 2. The Trojan Horse CEO. Before we get to the acquisition, we need to talk about one of the strangest conspiracy theories in modern business. And unlike most conspiracy theories, this one has some evidence behind it. Stephen Elop became Nokia's CEO in September 2010. He was the first non-Finnish CEO in Nokia's 145-year history. Where did he come from? Microsoft. He'd spent years running Microsoft's Office division before Nokia recruited him. Almost immediately, Elop began making decisions that seemed designed to destroy Nokia's value. First, the burning platform memo. Instead of keeping Nokia's struggles private while they fixed problems, Elop sent a brutally honest assessment to all employees, and it leaked within hours. Suddenly, the entire world knew Nokia considered itself a burning wreck. Consumer confidence evaporated. Partners got nervous. Stock prices tumbled. Then came the Windows Phone announcement. Elop didn't just partner with Windows Phone, he killed Nokia's other options. Nokia had been developing MeeGo, a promising Linux-based operating system. Cancelled. They could have adopted. Android like every other manufacturer. Rejected. Elop put all of Nokia's eggs in the Windows Phone basket, an operating system with less than 3% market share. Even stranger, Elop announced the Windows Phone partnership in February 2011, but didn't release the first Windows Phone Nokia device until November 2011. That's 9 months where Nokia was telling customers, "Our old phones are burning platform garbage, but our new phones aren't ready yet. Please wait." Imagine you're shopping for a phone. Would you buy from the company whose CEO just said their products are trash? Of course not. Nokia's market share went into free fall. By the time the Nokia Lumia 800, their first Windows Phone, launched in November 2011, Nokia's smartphone market share had collapsed from 29% to 16%. The phones themselves were actually excellent. The Lumia 920, released in 2012, had an amazing camera, beautiful design, and a wireless charging before Apple offered it. Tech enthusiasts loved them, but the damage was done. Developers weren't building apps for Windows Phone because it had no market share. Consumers weren't buying Windows phones because they had no apps. It was a death spiral. Here's where the conspiracy theory gets interesting. All of Elop's decisions made perfect sense if his goal was to tank Nokia's value so Microsoft could buy it cheap. In September 2013, Microsoft announced they would acquire Nokia's phone business for $7.2 billion. Stephen Elop would return to Microsoft as part of the deal, with his contract including a $25 million change of control bonus, a golden parachute for selling the company. Was Elop a Trojan Horse CEO, planted by Microsoft to destroy Nokia from within? We may never know for certain, but the pattern sure looks suspicious. Chapter 3. Ballmer's Last Stand. When Steve Ballmer announced the Nokia acquisition in September 2013, he was fighting for his job, and he didn't even know he'd already lost it. Behind closed doors, Microsoft's board of directors had decided Ballmer needed to go. He'd missed the smartphone revolution. He'd missed tablets. He'd missed cloud computing until Amazon Web Services had already dominated the market. Under Ballmer's leadership, Microsoft's stock price had essentially flatlined for a decade, while Apple, Google, and Amazon had soared. But Ballmer had one more chance to prove himself: turn Microsoft into a hardware company that could compete with Apple head-to-head. The Nokia acquisition was Ballmer's Hail Mary pass. He believed that controlling both hardware and software, the same vertical integration that made Apple's iPhone successful, would finally give Windows Phone the competitive edge it needed. In his announcement, Ballmer was vintage Ballmer, sweaty, enthusiastic, and wildly optimistic. "Together, we will sell 50 million phones," he promised investors. "We will build a family of devices that will delight customers. Let's pause on that number: 50 million phones. In 2013, Apple sold 150 million iPhones. Samsung sold over 300 million smartphones. Ballmer was saying Microsoft would capture roughly 10% of the smartphone market within a few years. Wall Street wasn't impressed. Microsoft's stock price actually dropped when the acquisition was announced. Analysts called it desperate and too late. One analyst wrote, "Microsoft is buying Nokia's smartphone business right as it's becoming clear that business has no future." But Ballmer pushed forward. The deal closed in April 2014 for $7.2 billion, $5 billion for the phone business itself, plus $2.2 billion for patent licenses. Ballmer promised this acquisition would generate billions in revenue. He promised ecosystem synergies. He promised that Microsoft's software expertise, combined with Nokia's hardware legacy, would create magic. There was just one problem. Ballmer wouldn't be around to execute his vision. In August 2013, 1 month before announcing the Nokia acquisition, Ballmer had announced he would resign within 12 months. The board had forced him out. He stayed long enough to finalize the Nokia deal, but by February 2014, Satya Nadella had been named Microsoft's new CEO. Nadella inherited Ballmer's $7.2 billion bet, and from day one, he knew it was a disaster. The Nokia acquisition officially closed on April 25, 2014. Satya Nadella stood on stage at a company event, posed for photos with Nokia employees, and gave speeches about Microsoft's mobile future. But privately, he was already planning the exit strategy. Because Nadella understood something Ballmer never accepted. Microsoft had already lost the smartphone war. The question wasn't how to win. The question was how to minimize the damage. Chapter 4. The write-off heard around the world 14 months. That's how long it took for Microsoft to admit the Nokia acquisition was a complete failure. In July 2015, Satya Nadella announced that Microsoft would write off $7.6 billion related to the Nokia phone business and lay off 7,800 employees, most of them former Nokia workers. Read that again. Microsoft paid $7.2 billion for Nokia's phone business, then wrote off $7.6 billion. They lost more money than they spent. That's not just a bad investment. That's value destruction on a spectacular scale. How do you lose more money than you paid for something? Let me explain. The $7.6 billion write-off included the original $7.2 billion purchase price, additional restructuring costs, severance packages for thousands of employees, and the accounting recognition of Nokia's continued losses after Microsoft took over. In accounting terms, Microsoft was admitting, this asset we bought is worth less than zero. In fact, it's been actively destroying shareholder value since we acquired it. To put $7.6 billion in perspective, that's enough money to buy Netflix, as it was valued in 2015, or Spotify, or give every person in Finland $1,400. Microsoft set $7.6 billion on fire, chasing Steve Ballmer's smartphone dream. The human cost was equally staggering. Microsoft laid off 7,800 people, most of them in Finland, where Nokia's phone division was headquartered. Entire towns built around Nokia manufacturing watched their economies collapse. The city of Salo, Finland, once called Nokia Town because Nokia employed a third of its workforce, went into economic depression. But here's the most painful part. Windows Phone market share actually got worse after Microsoft bought Nokia. In 2013, before the acquisition, Windows Phone had 3.5% global market share. Not great, but not nothing. By 2015, it had fallen to 1.7%. By 2016, it dropped to 0.7%. And by 2017, it was essentially 0%. Microsoft owned the entire Windows Phone ecosystem, the hardware, the software, the manufacturing, everything, and still couldn't compete with iPhone and Android. They had done exactly what Steve Ballmer said they needed to do, vertically integrate like Apple, and it failed completely. Satya Nadella tried to spin the disaster positively. "We're focusing on our core strengths," he told investors. "We're returning Microsoft to profitability." But everyone knew the truth. Microsoft had wasted $7.6 billion in nearly 3 years chasing a market they could never win. The Nokia write-off became one of the largest corporate impairments in tech history. Business schools now teach it as a case study in sunk cost fallacy, the mistake of throwing good money after bad, refusing to admit defeat until the losses become catastrophic. But the story doesn't end with a write-off. It ends with a whimper. Chapter 5. The Death Spiral After the $7.6 billion write-off in 2015. You might think Microsoft would immediately shut down Windows Phone. Instead, they tried one more time to make it work, because giving up would mean admitting Ballmer had wasted billions on nothing. In October 2015, Microsoft launched the Lumia 950 and 950 XL flagship Windows phones with impressive specs. They had great cameras, beautiful displays, and a unique feature called Continuum that let you plug your phone into a monitor and use it like a desktop computer. Tech reviewers liked the phones. Enthusiasts bought them. But the fundamental problem remained: no apps. By 2015, the app gap had become a canyon. Instagram came to Windows Phone 3 years after iOS and Android. Snapchat never came at all. Google deliberately refused to make any apps for Windows Phone. No YouTube, no Gmail, no Google Maps. When Microsoft built their own YouTube app, Google blocked it. Why did Google sabotage Windows Phone? Because they understood that smartphone operating systems follow a winner-take-all pattern. Supporting a third competitor would only weaken Google's Android. Better to let Windows Phone die. The developer situation was equally hopeless. Building apps for iOS and Android reached billions of users. Building apps for Windows Phone reached maybe 30 million users, and that number was shrinking every quarter. For developers, Windows Phone wasn't worth the effort. In October 2017, Joe Belfiore, Microsoft's vice president in charge of Windows Phone, tweeted what everyone already knew. "We have tried very hard to incent app devs. Paid money ... wrote apps for them. But volume of users is too low for most companies to invest." Translation: Windows Phone is dead. Microsoft never made an official announcement killing Windows Phone. They just ... stopped. No more hardware releases. No more major software updates. No more marketing. Windows Phone faded away like a ghost, leaving only nostalgic Reddit threads from people who remembered the smooth animations and beautiful tile interface. In 2016, Microsoft sold what was left of Nokia's feature phone business, the old-school dumb phones, to Foxconn and HMD Global for $350 million. Remember, they paid $7.2 billion for the whole thing. They sold the scraps for $350 million, less than 5% of what they paid. Nokia, the brand, survived. HMD Global now makes Nokia Android phones, and they're actually pretty good. But Microsoft's Nokia? It vanished completely, taking $7.6 billion of shareholder money with it. By 2019, Windows Phone market share was literally 0.0%, according to market researchers. Not effectively zero, actual zero. Microsoft had achieved the impossible, total and complete failure. So what went wrong? And more importantly, what can we learn from Microsoft's $7.6 billion mistake? Chapter 6. The lesson when ego costs billions. The Microsoft Nokia disaster teaches us 3 expensive lessons about business, ego, and knowing when to quit. Lesson 1. Market timing matters more than product quality. Windows phones were actually good. The Lumia 920, 950, and other models had excellent hardware, smooth software, and innovative features. Reviews praised them. Users who tried them loved them. But they arrived too late. By 2013, the smartphone market had already decided. iOS for premium users, Android for everyone else. There was no room for a third player, no matter how good the product. This happens in every industry. VHS beat Betamax despite being technically inferior. Facebook beat MySpace despite offering fewer features initially. Being first often beats being best. Microsoft learned this lesson the hard way, at a cost of $7.6 billion. Lesson 2. Vertical integration isn't a magic solution. Steve Ballmer believed that controlling both hardware and software like Apple does would automatically make Windows Phone successful. But vertical integration only works if you have market power. Apple's vertical integration succeeds because they had first-mover advantage and built an ecosystem of users, developers, and apps before competitors caught up. Microsoft tried to copy Apple's strategy without Apple's foundation. Owning Nokia's hardware didn't magically create apps. It didn't convince developers to build for Windows Phone. It didn't make consumers switch from iPhones. Vertical integration amplified Microsoft's problems instead of solving them. Lesson 3. Sunk cost fallacy destroys billions. This is the most important lesson. Sunk cost fallacy is the mistake of continuing to invest in something because you've already invested so much, even when all evidence says you should quit. Microsoft demonstrated textbook sunk cost fallacy. They spent billions developing Windows Phone. When that failed, they spent $7.2 billion buying Nokia instead of admitting defeat. When Nokia failed, they spent more money on Lumia flagships and developer incentives. At every stage, rational analysis said, cut your losses. But ego and pride kept Microsoft throwing money at an unwinnable fight. The irony? Under Satya Nadella, Microsoft became the most valuable company in the world by focusing on cloud computing, enterprise software, and services not smartphones. In 2024, Microsoft is worth over $3 trillion. They succeeded by playing to their strengths, not by copying Apple. If Ballmer had accepted defeat in 2011, admitted Windows Phone couldn't win, and invested those resources in Azure cloud services instead, Microsoft might have reached $3 trillion valuation years earlier. The real cost of the Nokia disaster wasn't $7.6 billion. It was the opportunity cost all the innovation Microsoft didn't pursue because they were obsessed with smartphones. Steve Ballmer's ego told him Microsoft had to compete everywhere. Satya Nadella's wisdom told him Microsoft should compete where they could win. That mindset difference is worth trillions. If stories like this, where we uncover the economic events that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention, fascinate you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started with these financial educational mysteries.